Hey everyone, it's Scott Rustrolz here for the June 5th edition of the Listen and Learn podcast. As always, thank you for listening. And as a quick reminder up front, if you enjoy our videos, we'd appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel and share the video with friends and family who you think may also enjoy our daily updates on the major stories of the day. So today, really just going to focus on one story, and that's the attack in London. But we're going to broaden it out because in the day-to-day political battles, we sometimes can lose sight of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is simple. There's a war on the West. There's a war on our ideology, which is one of freedom, free expression, equality of people, free expression of religion. And that's coming from us, on us, from radical Islamic terrorism. We need to, A, call the threat what it is, B, recognize the severity of the situation, and finally, act accordingly and determine whether or not we as a society are going to tolerate sharing a world with these barbarians. So we're not going to say the names of the cowards who commit, or losers, I actually like that term, who committed that attack. Let it be known that though that they killed 7 people in Great Britain, another 40 were injured, comes just days after the attack in Manchester. As with the Manchester attacker, they were under surveillance, and it seems like they should have been able to catch at least one of them. He was featured in a documentary a year ago entitled "A Jihadi Next Door," which should be sending off alarm bells. Obviously, one would hope in the intelligence community, but I do think we need to recognize that the intelligence community does have a very tough job, right? Because they don't, all of their successes are silent. One mistake, and we're well aware of it. And the problem, particularly in Europe, is you have open borders. So once someone is in one country in the European Union, they can go anywhere. So you need massive coordination between each state's countries' intelligence services as they pass on through country, which is a logistical nightmare. And in a sense, you're only as secure as the least secure member of the bloc, because once they let them in, they can go anywhere. And that's a major reason why the Great Britain decided to leave the European Union in last year's Brexit vote. Plus, given the massive amounts of immigration and migrants that they've accepted in recent years, you have tremendous numbers of people under surveillance. In the UK alone, they have 3,000 people who are they extremely closely watching, and another 20,000 people under surveillance. So you essentially have the UK saying there are 23,000 potential jihadists among them. And that's just in a massive pool of people that makes it extremely difficult to continue to monitor everyone, which is why, at the end of the day, the best way to keep your country safe is to keep the bad guys out in the first place. Because once you let them in big numbers, it puts a massive burden on your intelligence agencies. So you have to have secure borders, extremely vet everyone who comes in, and make sure they are people who share your values. I think the interesting thing is that the 2 of the attackers, at least, were the children of people who received asylum. The person who perpetrated the attack in Manchester was son of an asylum seeker. And if you look here at the Islamic terrorist attacks in this country, in Boston bombing, for instance, those were kids of asylum seekers. And one can't help but wonder if you have this issue with a lack of assimilation, particularly amongst many of these immigrants, where they're coming into our country and coming to the West, but they're not integrating into our society, they're not adopting our culture, and instead, they're staying insular, and you're seeing within that insularity these cells forming, and it's really that second generation often that's being radicalizing. So even if you do the asylum screening appropriately, perhaps on the first generation, the second generation, the problems can be exacerbated, which again speaks to the importance of assimilating people into the culture. And I think this gets to a bigger debate we need to as a society as to what we mean when we say we're a multicultural society. We want to be certainly a multiracial society, people of all races treated equally. We should attempt to be colorblind. We want to be, have a rich society of many values and people with different backgrounds. But the key thing we need to say is, if you're coming to our countries, you are accepting our basic cultural views. For instance, that women are equal to men, that you have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, that you value our freedoms, that you look at America, our constitutional framework, and you say, yes, I agree with the Constitution, and these are the values of the society I wish to join. And we can't, in the name of political correctness, perpetuate this myth that all cultures are equal. You're not going to tell me that in the United States has a culture that is no better than a country like Pakistan, which up until 6 months ago thought it was legal to commit honor killings, so long as the family was okay with it, where you can kill women for having premarital sex in the name of honor. That a culture that determines that to be within moral boundaries is in no ways equal to ours. So yes, if you're coming to our countries, you need to say you agree with our values, and you're going to bring your viewpoint, diverse views, but you are buying to these basic tenets that upon the West has been built. And that's really the issue here, where you have immigrants coming, small, even if they're in small numbers, who are just not assimilating. And then once they're here, it's tremendously difficult to stop a lone wolf attacks, which is why it becomes important to cut off them from getting into the countries in the first place. But it only solves half the problem. At some point, you need to solve the root of the problem, which is in the Middle East, which is in these massive terrorist networks, which is in funding for them, and we need to crack down on it. And it all comes down to, as a society, as a civilization, this is a clash of two different civilizations, two ways of seeing the world. A West, a civilized world that believes all people are equal, that believes in freedom, that believes in equality, and a backwards, evil, radical Islamic ideology that wants to rule over, does not believe people with other religions deserve freedom, or in many cases deserve to live, that attacks, goes out of their way to attack innocent people, and seeks domination. And the question is, do we have the will, power to eradicate it from this earth? And that's where, now I want to make a very broad, big point here, and that's this. 20th century was witness to some of the most brutal forces of evil in mankind's history, namely Nazism and communism. In the most harrowing moments in that struggle against evil, we were blessed with leaders who refused to coexist, and rather they were determined to eradicate evil from the face of the earth. We owe our freedom today to the resolve of the titanic figures of history, men and women like Churchill, Roosevelt, MacArthur, Eisenhower, Thatcher, and Reagan, as well as the courage of millions of ordinary people who did not shudder in the face of evil. They did not blink. And despite being our bloodiest century, that's why the 20th century is home to man's greatest triumphs, from civilians showing bravery in Dunkirk, to the storming of the beaches in Normandy, to the fall of the Berlin Wall. We, as a civilization, refuse to accept the existence of such evil, and we had the resolve and grit to crush it. Today, we face a new threat in the form of radical Islamic jihadism, which, like the evil movements of the 20th century, seeks to terrify and then rule over us. And this battle against radical Islamic terrorism is our defining struggle. It is this generation's Nazism. It's this generation's communism. And will we accept this evil in our world? Will we accept it as a fact of life? Will we grow numb to it? Or will we prove worthy of the legacy passed down to us from our forefathers and destroyed completely? That's the question we, as citizens, and our leaders need to answer. And we need to decide whether our generation and whether or not our era will be remembered as one of Churchill's or of Neville Chamberlain's. So we cannot back away from this debate. It's one of whether or not we're going to have the resolve to say, as Churchill did with Nazism, as Reagan did with communism, that this is a force for evil and we will not rest until it's gone from this earth. Or instead, are we going to compromise our values, say, no, we're okay with this, and risk it continuing to bleed over into our society, perpetuating fear, causing havoc and evil? We as a society really need to decide, where do we come down on that? And are we willing to take the fight to them, to say that this is not acceptable behavior in a civilized world, and we're going to wipe it out completely? So that's really, I think, what's going on. We need to have this. The Islamic radical terrorists have decided to wage war on the West, and we, as a civilization, need to decide if we're willing to wage total war back. Thank you for listening. Please come back tomorrow where we'll focus on some other stories, but really wanted to devote an entire segment to this, because this is the defining battle of our generation. Thanks so much.